What if, in this very moment, someone who shares the deepest thread of your soul is sitting somewhere quietly overwhelmed, not because of anything you said, not because of something you did, but simply because of who you are finally choosing to become? Most people spend the better part of their lives believing that love will arrive the moment someone picks them. They wait by the window of their hearts, watching for a message, a signal, a confession, a miracle that will sweep in and rewrite everything. But what if the most powerful chapter of your love story did not begin when another person finally noticed you? What if it began the day you stopped running toward others and started walking toward yourself? Right now, something invisible yet undeniably real is shifting the fabric of your emotional world. A change so quiet and yet so immense that its tremors are traveling through every meaningful connection your soul has ever made. The version of you that once shrank in the presence of rejection, that searched every room for someone to confirm your worth, that held on even when holding on was tearing you apart. That version is dissolving, and in its place, something stronger, something truer, something that has always been waiting beneath all the years of doubt and searching, is finally rising. And here is what the universe wants you to know right now. The moment you began to heal, the moment you began to grow, the moment you began to treat yourself as someone worth protecting and honoring, something extraordinary happened. The emotional distance that had been growing between you and the most important connection of your life began to close. The bond that seemed uncertain, seemed untethered, seemed to be drifting further from shore, shifted. It turned. It began moving toward you. Your soulmate feels what is happening inside you. They feel your strength the way you feel warm from a fire you cannot yet see. They feel your transformation the way a body senses the first light before the sun appears over the horizon. And for reasons they may not yet have words for reasons that live in a language beneath logic, their heart is overflowing. Because you finally did the one thing that rearranges everything. You chose yourself. The moment you chose yourself first, the entire architecture of your inner world began to rebuild itself quietly and completely. For a long time, perhaps longer than you're even aware of, you may have carried the belief, never spoken aloud but deeply felt, that love, happiness, belonging, and emotional safety were things that could only be delivered to you by someone else. Like many people who have loved deeply and been wounded in that loving, you may have spent years shaping yourself around what others needed from you. You may have learned to read the room before you read your own heart. You may have adjusted your voice, your boundaries, your very sense of what you deserved, based on what seemed most likely to keep certain people close. You may have stayed quiet when something hurt you, kept the peace when what you needed was truth, and given more than you had in the hope that generosity would be returned as love. Without quite realizing it, you had handed the key to your own worthiness over to other people and then waited, often painfully, for them to decide whether you deserve to be let in. The quiet tragedy of this is not that you were foolish. It is that you were human. And the most human thing in the world is to want to be loved, to want to be chosen, to want to be seen as enough by the people who matter to you. But the deeper truth, the one your soul has been gently steering you toward through every disappointment, every silence, every moment you felt invisible, is that no one outside of you can give you the foundation you were searching for. The more you looked outward for that confirmation, the more disconnected you became from the very source of it, which lives within you and has always lived there. Choosing yourself is not a proclamation of not needing anyone. It is not coldness dressed up as independence. It is something far quieter and far more powerful than that. It is the moment you stop treating your own needs as an afterthought. It is the moment you recognize that your feelings are not inconvenient, that your boundaries are not demands, that your dreams are not selfish, and that your emotional well-being deserves the same tenderness you spent years offering everyone else. This recognition rarely arrives as a sudden flash of light. More often it arrives through suffering, through the heartbreak that finally cracked open an old belief, through the loneliness that became a teacher, through the loss that revealed what had been taken for granted, through the rejection that, in its sting, forced you to stop seeking approval from a source that was never going to give you what you needed. As this awareness began to settle in you, something in your inner world began to reorganize. The energy you've been pouring outward, toward gaining acceptance, toward managing other people's emotions, toward earning what should have been freely given, began returning to you. You started building something from the inside out, something the world can feel even before you speak a word. A quality of self-possession. A quiet that is not emptiness but presence. A confidence that does not announce itself, because it does not need to. This is one of the deepest forms of attraction that exists. Not the kind that performs, not the kind that charms, but the kind that simply stands in its own truth. And your soulmate feels it. They feel the difference between someone who needs to be chosen and someone who has already chosen themselves. They feel the shift in how you carry what you have been through, and it moves them in ways they are only beginning to understand. Healing old emotional wounds is among the most quietly revolutionary things a person can do, because so much of the life we live on the surface is being shaped by the life we carry underneath. Emotional wounds are rarely as visible as physical ones. They do not announce themselves. They do not come with clear timestamps or obvious causes. Sometimes they were created through a single devastating moment, a betrayal, an abandonment, a rejection that landed in the soft center of a still-forming sense of self. But more often they were formed slowly, through repeated experiences of feeling unseen, unheard, too much, or not enough, through learning that love was conditional, through discovering that the people who were supposed to protect you were sometimes the very ones who cause harm. These experiences do not simply pass through us. They settle. They take up quiet residence in the part of the mind that interprets every new experience through the lens of what has already been endured. This is why patterns repeat in ways that can feel almost cruel in their consistency. The unconscious mind is not trying to punish you when it draws you toward familiar pain. It is attempting, in its own indirect and often misguided way, to resolve something that was never fully processed. The faces change. The circumstances shift. But the feeling, that familiar ache of being overlooked, or that old panic of being left, or that crushing sense that you are somehow fundamentally too much or not enough, comes back wearing a new face, and it will keep coming back with increasing urgency until the wound it points to is finally faced with honesty. Facing it does not mean reliving it. It does not mean reopening every old door and walking back into every dark room. It means developing the courage to acknowledge what happened, to sit with the emotions those experiences left behind, and to begin separating what you felt from who you are. Because one of the cruelest things that emotional wounds do is convince us that the pain we carry is proof of our unworthiness, that we were left because we were unlovable, that we were criticized because we were defective, that we were overlooked because we did not matter. Healing is a slow, patient process of discovering that these conclusions were formed in pain, and that pain, no matter how intense, is not a mirror that shows you the truth. As this understanding grows, something in your energy changes. A healed person does not carry the same invisible weight that an unhealed person carries. There's a kind of emotional lightness that comes when old pain no longer has to work so hard to make itself known. Interactions feel different. Relationships feel different. You begin responding to life in the present moment rather than from a memory of all the moments that hurt you. And the people you are most deeply connected to, especially the one your soul is moving toward, can feel this difference as clearly as they can feel a change in the air before rain. Releasing fear and unhealthy attachment is one of the most misunderstood forms of inner work, because fear rarely introduces itself honestly. It does not walk in wearing its own name. It walks in dress as love. It tells you that you are panicking because you care. It tells you that you are checking because you're invested. It tells you that you are holding on so tightly because what you have found is worth holding on to. And perhaps some of that is true. But underneath it, if you are willing to look, there is something older and more frightened than love. There's a voice of every time you were left without warning. Every time affection was withdrawn as punishment. Every time closeness was followed by loss. Fear is not the enemy, and it is not a sign of weakness. But when fear is the one steering a relationship, when anxiety becomes the primary way you engage with someone you love, it slowly poisons the very connection it is trying to protect. Unhealthy attachment is what happens when we unconsciously place our emotional stability inside another person and then live in constant dread of losing access to it. When this happens, even the most ordinary things carry enormous weight. A message that goes unanswered for a few hours becomes evidence of abandonment. A moment of quiet becomes a sign of withdrawal. A single disagreement becomes proof that everything is about to fall apart. The mind becomes so busy managing the threat of loss that it forgets to actually experience the love that is present. And the person on the other side of that love begins to feel not cherished but pressured, not chosen but trapped. Releasing this kind of attachment does not mean caring less. It does not mean manufacturing distance or teaching yourself to be unaffected. It means doing the deeper work of finding your emotional ground within yourself so that you are no longer entirely dependent on another person's behavior to feel safe. It means recognizing that you survived everything that happened before you arrived at this moment, and that if this connection were changed, to shift, to take a different shape than you imagined, you would survive that too. This is not pessimism. It is the most profound form of trust. Trust not in a particular outcome, but in your own resilience. And when this trust takes root, something remarkable happens to the way love feels. It becomes lighter. It becomes freer. The grip loosens, and what remains is not loss, but spaciousness. Love that breathes. Love that allows. Love that does not need to constantly prove itself by holding on. Your soulmate feels this shift as one of the most significant changes in your energy. When you're no longer approaching them from the place of fear, when your presence communicates patience and openness rather than anxiety and urgency, the entire emotional dynamic between you transforms. Connection that once felt tangled begins to clarify. Trust that had been buried under fear begins to surface. The relationship stops being something you are desperately trying to preserve and becomes something you are genuinely experiencing. Becoming emotionally authentic is the courage to stop performing yourself. For many people, this courage takes years to develop, because performing is something most of us began learning long before we were old enough to understand what we were doing. From the earliest moments of our lives, we received messages about which parts of ourselves were acceptable and which parts needed to be hidden, softened, or changed. We learned what earned warmth and what caused distance. We learned which emotions were welcomed and which made the people we needed feel uncomfortable. And slowly, with the kind of unconscious intelligence that children possess in enormous measure, we became skilled editors of ourselves. Some of us learned to keep our sadness quiet because sadness made others feel helpless. Some of us learned to shrink our anger because anger was too threatening. Some of us learned to mask our fear with humor, or our loneliness with cheerfulness, or our depth with lightness. We presented a version of ourselves that seemed most likely to keep us safe and loved. And it worked, in the way that survival strategies always work, which is that they get you through but at a cost. The cost was the growing distance between the self you showed the world and the self you actually live within the quiet of your own interior. Over time, this distance creates an ache that can be difficult to name. You may have relationships but feel unseen within them. You may be surrounded by people who think they know you but feel profoundly alone. You may be loved for a version of yourself that does not feel entirely real and wonder sometimes whether anyone would love the version that is. Emotional authenticity begins when exhaustion of maintaining performance outweighs the fear of being seen. It begins when you start to slowly, carefully, courageously let the real version of yourself into your own life. This does not happen all at once. It happens in moments, in the small decisions to say what you actually feel instead of what is easiest, in the boundary drawn not because it was required by the situation, but because it was required by your truth, in the vulnerability offered not to manipulate an outcome, but simply because it was honest. Each of these moments is an act of profound self-respect, and each one makes the next one slightly less frightening. People who have developed emotional authenticity carry themselves differently. Their words and their energy are not in conflict with each other. There is no gap between what they say and what they mean, between how they present and how they actually feel. This creates a quality of presence that is deeply magnetic, not because it is polished or strategically appealing, but because it is real. And realness, in a world where so much is curated and performed, is one of the rarest and most compelling things a human being can offer. Your soulmate is not drawn to a perfected image of you. They're drawn to you, the actual complex, evolving, imperfect, deeply genuine you. And the more you allow that version of yourself to exist openly, the more they are able to find their way to you. Trusting the journey is perhaps the most difficult practice that genuine growth requires, because the human mind has a deep and understandable resistance to uncertainty. We are wired to seek patterns, to predict outcomes, to create maps of what is coming so that we can prepare ourselves for it. In matters of love and connection especially, this need for certainty can become consuming. We want to know when, We want to know how. We want assurances that the hope we are carrying will not eventually be confirmed as foolishness. And when those assurances do not come, when life continues unfolding in its own unhurried, nonlinear way without confirming our timelines or honoring our expectations, we can begin to interpret the silence as failure. But the need to control the unfolding is almost always rooted in fear rather than wisdom. Beneath every attempt to force certainty is the deeper worry that if we allow things to move at their own pace, they will move in the wrong direction. The mind, trying to protect the heart, becomes hypervigilant. It monitors every sign. It analyzes every interaction for evidence. It constructs narratives and then tears them down and rebuilds them. And in the midst of all this mental labor, the actual experience of living, of growing, of noticing, of being genuinely present to what is already unfolding, gets lost. Trusting the journey is a practice of releasing the belief that your role is to manage the outcome and returning your attention to the quality of your participation. It is recognizing that delays are not necessarily derailments, that silence is not always absence, that the timing of the universe, while it may rarely match the timeline your anxiety has constructed, tends to be more accurate than it first appears. The things that come at precisely the right moment, and only when looked at from the other side does the rightness become visible, are often the things that were worth waiting for. And the things that did not come when you demanded them were often, in retrospect, a form of protection as trust develops. The experience of uncertainty shifts. What once felt like threat begins to feel like space. The openness of not yet knowing becomes something you can sit with, even something you can appreciate. Your soulmate feels this shift in you as a profound change in the quality of your presence. A person who trusts themselves and trusts the process of their own life communicates a kind of inner steadiness that is deeply reassuring to those who love them. There is no grasping, no demanding, no desperate need to fast forward to the resolution. There is simply someone who is genuinely here, genuinely growing, genuinely at home in the life they are living right now. Even as they move toward the life they are building, aligning with your higher purpose is not a dramatic discovery. It does not arrive as a bow from above or a moment of sudden clarity that reorganizes everything. It is a gradual movement, sometimes painfully slow, sometimes deceptively quiet, toward the life that is most authentically yours. Many people live for years, sometimes entire lifetimes, navigating by a map drawn by someone else. They pursue success as it was defined for them, rather than as it feels true to them. They measure their worth against standards they inherited rather than values they chose. They move through life at a pace and in a direction that makes sense to the people around them, while something deep within them quietly and persistently aches for a different kind of meaning. The movement toward purpose often begins in the places that hurt, in the job that slowly drains you of something you cannot name, in the relationship that asks you to be someone smaller than who you are, in the moment of profound loss or failure that strips away everything you have been using to avoid the real questions. These disruptions, as devastating as they are while you are inside them, often contain the seeds of the most important redirections of a life. They force the questions that comfort never would have allowed. Who am I apart from what I do? What do I actually value beneath what I have been taught to value? What would I choose if choosing for myself were truly allowed? As these questions are asked and slowly answered, not once but repeatedly, in layer after layer as understanding deepens, a sense of direction begins to emerge that feels different from anything external ambition ever produced. It feels less like striving and more like recognition, less like achieving and more like returning. And as life begins to be lived in closer alignment with this inner direction, a quality of wholeness develops that affects every relationship you inhabit. You are no longer looking to others to define you or complete you. You arrive in connection, already carrying a sense of yourself. You share from fullness rather than searching from emptiness. And your soulmate feels this deeply, consistently, in the way their heart reaches toward you even in moments of distance. As this journey comes to a moment of reflection, one truth rises above all others with extraordinary clarity. The transformation your soulmate is feeling is not the result of any strategy you employed. It is not the outcome of changing yourself to fit someone else's idea of what is desirable. It is not something you performed or presented or carefully constructed to be found. It is the natural, inevitable, deeply sacred result of something far more significant. You turn toward yourself. You stopped looking outward for what can only be found within. You chose yourself first, not as an act of pride, but as an act of love. You began the slow and courageous work of healing the wounds that were shaping your choices from the shadows. You released the fear and the desperate clinging that had been quietly strangling the connections you most wanted to flourish. You found the courage to let yourself be seen as you truly are rather than as you believed you needed to appear. You learned in the most personal and irreversible way that the journey itself is a destination, and that real trust, is a foundation on which everything meaningful is built. And you aligned yourself imperfectly and honestly and persistently with a deeper current of what your life is actually for. Each of these movements created a wave, and those waves travel through the unseen channels of genuine connection, through the invisible thread that links you becoming to the heart of someone who is also, right now, in their own way, becoming. The person you are growing into is someone who does not need to chase. They are someone who naturally draws, not through performance, not through perfection, but through the rare and luminous quality of a human being who has done the work of knowing themselves. Remember this as you move forward. The greatest source of attraction is not an image you project. It is the wholeness you inhabit. The greatest gift you can bring to love is not your need to be completed. It is the fullness you have found within yourself. And the greatest love story you will ever be part of did not begin the moment someone noticed you from across a room. It began in a quiet, private, unremarkable moment when you looked at yourself with honesty and said, "This person deserves to be loved." Starting with me, as you continue forward from this moment, carry the awareness of how far you have already traveled. The challenges you navigated did not diminish you. They refined you. The pain you endured did not break you. It taught you about your resilience, your depth, your capacity to survive and to grow and to remain open even after being hurt. Every step you have taken toward greater self-awareness, every moment you chose truth over comfort, every time you honored your own worth when everything around you was asking you to abandon it, all of that is alive in you. May you walk forward with the kind of quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself. May you love with the openness of someone who trusts both themselves and the unfolding of their life. May every challenge ahead of you carry the seed of your next expansion, and may every connection you enter be deepened by the most important work you have ever done, the ongoing, imperfect, extraordinary work of becoming fully, authentically, courageously yourself. Thank you for letting these words find you today. Your journey is not over. In many ways, it is only now truly beginning.